straight from the mayor's mouth, with Matthew Dickerson from Dubbo Regional Council.
Hello everyone and welcome to Straight from the Mayor's Mouth. Hello there, Matt. Can you hear me as you're pacing your way up there on Heartbreak Hill in Sydney today?
Oh dear, look, I can speak properly now, but if this was a live recording, then yeah, I'd still be puffing and panting up Heartbreak Hill or puffing and panting down Heartbreak Hill. But City to Surf, I've done it before, and I must admit, I struggle to see many events that I've seen around the world that are as well organised as City to Surf. About 90,000 people here at this event, and I just think they do things like clockwork. Very impressive in the way it's organised. And of course, I'm trying to retain my title this year. I took out the self-created title last year of the fastest mayor in the nation. So I'm trying to retain that title this year. Happy to take challenges from any other mayors that think they've beaten me this year.
So what price were you on centre bet to take out the title?
I couldn't find anywhere that'd take my money, actually.
No one to take the money. Well, mate, well done. You're a braver soul than me to get up there and bust your way up that Heartbreak Hill again. I did it many, many years ago. And look, to be honest, I'm nowhere near that level of fitness to go back and do it again. So all kudos to you for doing it again this year. Mate, look, let's jump straight into today. We didn't get a chance last week to talk about Rex. Now, it's obviously been in the news. There's been lots and lots of discussion surrounding Rex. Tell me, what's happening with Rex here in Dubbo?
A few things that are important in this. The first thing I want to say, Mark, is that I don't proclaim to be an airline expert. There are lots of people that have got opinions as to why Rex has found themselves in the problems that they've got now, and that relates to various decisions they made about taking on capital city markets, all the rest of it. I don't have access to all of their figures. I'm not trying to be an expert on airlines, so I don't really want to get into that part of the debate. What I do know about Rex is that for 22 years, Rex has been a fantastic airline to serve regional New South Wales. And when I look at it from the outside looking in, they seem to have created a business model that's a very low cost business model. So they use Saab 340B planes. So they're an older plane. So obviously not as expensive to buy that fleet. They've got typically younger pilots. They seem to really work on making sure their expenses are at a minimum. What that means for regional New South Wales is that they can fly into some ports that probably other airlines would not find viable. And in our area here around Dubbo, Parkes is obviously the first one that comes to mind. The passenger numbers for Parkes, I don't know what they are, but I'm sure Parkes from time to time have had discussions with Qantas or other airlines, but the passenger numbers probably haven't been strong enough. So they've been able to have Rex flying in there, and I'm sure Rex makes money out of that particular route. And again, that's where I think Rex do a good job servicing some of those ports that aren't able to be serviced by someone else. I know we were having a discussion just the other day with the Broken Hill Council, and Broken Hill is serviced to Sydney by both Rex and Qantas, but to Adelaide, and obviously Broken Hill is closer to Adelaide than it is to Sydney, but to Adelaide it's only serviced by Rex. So when you start to talk about Rex being in voluntary administration, what's the future of Rex? Is Rex going to go broke? The real danger here is that if it does, that will have two major impacts. One, places like Parkes, places like Broken Hill to Adelaide will lose an airline service. Is there another airline that will step in and take up that service? Maybe, maybe not. I'm not sure. But the other part is it's capacity. Dubbo now, for example, is back up almost pre-COVID numbers, 195,000 passengers through our airport last financial year. Our pre-COVID, we got up to about 217,000. So we're getting good numbers there, and it would be difficult for Qantas to service all those passengers with their current services they've got in place just by themselves. So the fact that you've got Rex there, and in Dubbo's example, they typically carry 55 to 60,000 people a year, then it helps complement the services and also keeps prices reasonable because you've got competition. So it would be terrible to see Rex go completely broke. Now, the important message that I've had from the administrators has been we're guaranteeing, as in the administrators, not Dubbo, the administrators are guaranteeing those tickets now. If you buy a ticket on Rex today, you can be confident that the administrators are running this and that ticket is going to be there. So I think numbers of wrecks have dropped off since the announcement, which makes sense. People are scared that they buy a ticket and then the airline's not there the next day. But the administrators have sent out a clear message to say, we're running the show. We will make sure that those services keep running. So if you buy a ticket, then that ticket is going to be safe. And I think that's the message they want to get out there. So if you do fly Rex normally, I'd encourage you to keep flying Rex. And whether Rex still runs it, whether Rex is sold off to someone else, all of those questions I don't know the answers to. But at the moment, Rex is still running in regional ports. Obviously, their capital city flights have all stopped, their capital city to capital city flights. But the regional ports to the capital city, so Dubbo to Sydney, for example, they're still flying. And anyone that would use Rex in the past, then I'd encourage you, definitely keep using them.
So it sounds like the administrators have been in contact with you, Matt, but there's no one from Rex themselves that have actually been in contact. So obviously administrators have been put in charge to make contact with groups like yourself.
Absolutely right. And I suppose that's the way normally things happen in administration. Effectively, Ernst & Young are in charge of the operations now. So there's really not a lot of opportunity or a lot of point, more to the point, about Rex being in contact with Dubbo Regional Council about things, because the administrators are the ones dealing with the finances, dealing with all of the operations. And they've certainly, Ernst & Young have certainly reached out to a number of councils and the state government in discussions we've had there. And that's been a part of their messaging is, please, if we want to be able to sell this airline or keep this airline running, if the passenger numbers drop off dramatically, it's going to make it very difficult going forward to do anything with that airline.
Has there been any contact from either federal or state government groups to assure you of the plan in moving forward with this?
Certainly we've had discussions with state and federal government, and it's a tricky one because the federal government is typically responsible for airports, and the federal government is normally charged with the responsibility around flying in this country, but state governments obviously play a part. And even the state government, in our example, they use airlines a lot for having state government employees coming out to regional locations. So they are a big user of the airlines, not just Rex, on all airlines. So there's certainly been discussions there. There's been a bit of talk around about a bailout. And I must admit, I'm not personally a great fan of the idea of a bailout. It seems a bit unfair to me that you've got multiple airlines flying. You haven't just got Qantas and Rex, there are other airlines as well.
No, that's right.
You've got Airlink, you've got Link Airways, you've got Pelican, you've got a number of different airlines. And it would seem unfair to me that one airline didn't get their finances quite right. And so they're given some money from the government, which is our money, your money, my money. But other airlines that were running themselves better don't get that reward. So I'm not sure that seems fair in the whole scheme of things. If you wanted to support regional ports, maybe one way you could do it is to support regional airports, which are typically owned by councils, and make our landing fees cheaper. So, for example, in Dubbo's case, we charge $19.45 per passenger for a landing fee, and then the security costs on top of that, and they vary because we take our security costs, divide that by the number of passengers, and then charge that at cost onto the various airlines. But essentially, if that $90.45 was only $5, and if the federal government subsidised Dubbo Regional Airport to make up that difference, that would mean that we would charge the airlines less. That means that they could have a little bit better pricing for their tickets, which would encourage more people to use the service. So if there was going to be some sort of subsidy, or bailout's the wrong word in this scenario, but some sort of ongoing subsidy, I'd be encouraging the federal government and or the state government to do those subsidies with councils to make the cost of running the airline cheaper rather than paying money directly to airlines.
Is there also maybe an opportunity here for groups like, as you mentioned, Airlink, Link Airways, or I've even heard being mentioned Virgin, to step in here and to take over the routes?
Absolutely right. And we've had discussions with Virgin before. I've had several discussions with Virgin over the years. One of the problems is that they used to run an Embraer RJ145, I think was the model of aircraft. That was their regional aircraft. And that's a similar aircraft to the Q400, similar size aircraft, similar weight of aircraft, about that 30-ton weight. The problem now is Virgin have made a decision to go away from that and use a Fokker plane as their regional plane, which is a 100-seat plane. It's about a 45-ton plane. So they've made a decision that's a better plane for them, which is fine. but there'd be some airports where that plane would be too large to land at some of those regional airports. So even though there might be an opportunity for a Virgin or someone else to step in, either to take over from Rex as the current operation, or would it be more logical, would be that if Rex closed up shop, then another airline might come in and provide those services there. I think in some scenarios, in Dubbo's case, they may be keen to do that. But in some of those smaller scenarios, they may not be so keen to go to a Parks, for example, because their cost base is probably a little bit different to the Rex cost base, which is where, again, I'm not an expert on it, but I think it seemed like Rex did a good job of having a very low cost base to supply a service where other airlines didn't want to supply that service.
As they say, it's going to be very interesting. We need to watch this space over the next few weeks and see what transpires on this.
Yeah, absolutely right.
All right, this sort of nice little segue, actually moving into the second one here today, Matt, because of course we talked about very briefly there a couple of weeks ago, the starting up again of the ASX CEO series. Now, this is where the Dubbo Chamber of Commerce meet for a breakfast and catch up with a representative of one of the Australia's best CEOs poking in. And it looks like one of the first ones you had was from Qantaslink, and it all began last Tuesday. How did it all go?
Well, that is interesting. It wasn't designed around the fact that Rex happened to have their minor issues at the moment. This was something that was locked in some time ago. And
it's quite timely then, isn't it, really, the way it worked?
It did actually work out that way. And obviously there were a few questions at the breakfast about Rex, but I'll just talk briefly about the ASX 200 CEO series. This is something we started way back in 2014, and then 2015 we started in earnest. And the very first, we started with one person, Pip Marlowe from Microsoft, as a one-off, and then we went, this wasn't a bad idea. Should we keep doing this? So when we created this whole idea of this ASX 200 CEO series, the very first speaker we had, because we had Qantas to come in as a sponsor, was John Gissing, the CEO of Qantaslink. And we ran that for a couple of years, and then amalgamation and things happened. So part of my job this time was to revive this series. And it's a combination with the Dubbo Business Chamber, an exceptional chamber well known around the state. We also got Qantas to come in as a sponsor again to fly these various CEOs out here. Then we also got Taronga Western Plains Zoo, which is a great draw card. So when we say to one of these CEOs, please come to Dubbo, speak at a chamber breakfast, and also you get to stay at the zoo, that's usually enough to get many of these CEOs across the line. And obviously my job, I've got the simplest job in all of those things there. My job is to attract the various CEOs from ASX 200 companies. So it's a real combination, and I quite like that collaboration amongst all of those. When we got onto Qantas and said we'd like you to come on board again, they're happy to do that. And as the CEO series part 2, if you like, it was a nice bit of connection there to say, well, we've got a new CEO in Qantaslink. Rachel Yengowan is the new CEO. So you kicked off the first one with John Gissing, so why don't we kick off this one with Rachel Yengowan?
There's a nice sense of synergy about that. I like that.
Yeah, there was too. So Rachel came along. Actually, I met with Rachel, hadn't met her before. I met with Rachel on Monday before the actual breakfast. She only took over as CEO of Qantaslink back in November 2023. And interestingly enough, the last time we would have had the series out here with John out here, one of the points that was pointed out at the breakfast was that you had at the time Alan Joyce as the CEO of Qantas. You had Gareth Evans, not the politician Gareth Evans, a different one, as the CEO of Jetstar, and you had John Gissing as the CEO of Qantaslink. Fast forward now, maybe 9 years later, and the three CEOs of those three parts of Qantas are all females. So that was quite significant.
Sign of the times.
Yeah, absolutely right. So you've got, I think it's Steph Fuller's the CEO of Jetstar. Of course, you've got Vanessa, the CEO of Qantas, and then you've got Rachel Yengowan, CEO of Qantaslink. But she spoke very well at the breakfast. The idea is to impart some knowledge. You don't get to be the CEO of a company of this size without having some pretty good skills and having worked pretty hard for a long period of time. So our logic is you've got some skills to pass on. So let's hear those. And Rachel was good. She passed on a range of lessons, resilience, just a whole range of things that Rachel thinks she's learned along the way and she imparted to the audience, but also then talked a little bit about Qantas, some of the challenges with Qantas and the logistics. I mean, it's just flying an airline, the logistics of so many different things. You've got to come together, just the person that stands there at the airport to direct you from the plane into the terminal. I mean, just every little part has to come together. You can't afford to have a pilot that says, no, I'm not feeling that great today, I'm not coming in, and then you just fly the plane with one pilot. You've got to have another pilot on the ready to go when a pilot can't come in. Like, there are so many moving parts. The fact that we actually have an airline industry at all is sometimes amazing to me. So it was actually quite interesting to hear about all of that. And, of course, we had some questions. And, of course, Rex came up as a question.
I was going to say, was the Rex discussion part of the whole discussion?
There were some questions from the audience around Rex. And I get the point there that for Rachel it's a bit hard because from her perspective it's a competitor. And so you think she might be dancing all over the administration of Rex. But she wasn't. She said they do serve an important purpose for regional South Wales. And she was quite nice in saying that we like to have Rex there to service some of those ports that we can't necessarily service. I'm sure somewhere in some boardroom people are saying this is a great opportunity for Qantas, but she was polite enough not to say that. Again, it was just, I suppose it exposed the frailties of the airline industry in general. And it's one of those things that, sure, Rex today, but could it be Qantas tomorrow? Everyone thinks it's a big company, they can't go broke. But, of course, we've seen big companies go broke before, so it's not impossible. But, again, there were some good questions there and certainly some interest around what might be the future of the airline industry and even the future of airline industry in the fuels that we might see. So, what are the fuels that Qantas is going to be using in 20 years' time? Are you going to be flying hydrogen or electric? And Rachel gave an answer that said on short-haul flights, she thinks electric battery planes are probably going to be the way they'll travel. Hydrogen, even though there's been discussion around hydrogen, she didn't see that as a great option. On the long-haul flights, Sydney to LA type flights, she thinks sustainable aviation fuel, SAF, will be where they'll go. And that's a whole area of research being done at the moment to try and create aviation fuels that use existing planes, existing engines, but are able to be created with renewables, plant-based sort of renewable concepts. And that's a real area that's being developed at the moment. But in 20 years' time, Rachel thought that might be more the way to go. But also longer flights. So it won't be long. Rachel mentioned that we'll have a Dubbo, not a Dubbo, that'd be nice, a Sydney to London flight. We're talking maybe 20 hours up in the air.
Geez, that's a long haul.
Oh, so
I don't know if I could do that, to be honest.
He said Perth to London is pretty popular. That's 17 hours.
Yes.
And I find two things about that incredible. One, 20 hours, that means you've got to put enough fuel on board to fly in the air for 20 hours. And these things use a lot of fuel. So that's point one.
Storage of that. That's unbelievable.
It is, that's right. And point two, it's a long time to sit up in the plane. And they do actually, the design of their plane, it's an A350 they'll be using. The design of the plane is such that you will actually have what she kind of referenced as a breakout area. So an area where you can just go and stretch out a bit rather than, as you see most people on those long flights, walking up and down the aisles to stretch their legs out a bit.
That's me.
Yeah. I've often thought it'd be good to have a little exercise bike on a plane when you're up there for that long. But I don't know that I want to sit beside me after I've been on the exercise bike for 20 minutes.
Yeah, that's right. Because knowing you'd be the competitive self and you'd be busting it out, sprinting it like you're doing the Tour de France for half an hour.
Right. And then come back all sweaty.
That's right. Looking for the shower. There it is.
Yeah, that's right. So,
well, that's fantastic. So when's the next one?
Well, the idea is to have these monthly. They won't have one in September because September's usually a more discussion around the rhinos, and so there's usually a breakfast reserved around the rhinos for that one. But typically they'll be each month, and we've locked in. I think so far there's been 5 CEOs we've locked in. We've got a couple more this year, and then in next year up to about April. So they'll be announced as time goes forward. But I think it's one of those things that even just people in the room are pretty chuffed. There's someone there from a major company like Qantaslink sitting there in the room talking to them about things that are happening in business and getting a bit of feedback around the community as well.
It's a great exposure for them, great opportunity. You think in any sort of world of education, which is what this is, you're educating people. It's to get the opportunity to have one of Australia's finest CEOs turn up there on your doorstep. Yeah, you'd be mad not to go and listen to it.
Yeah, exactly right.
Now, keeping running with what appears a bit of an aviation theme here today, during the week, you're at the opening of the Bodangora Fire Brigade Station. Now, this was last week as well. So tell me, Bodangora out there at Wellington, that's of course one of the airstrips out there. You're out there, so Fire Brigade Station. They didn't have one out there. I would have thought that would be a normal thing to have at an airport, even though it's not like our airports. It's obviously its own little airport at Wellington.
No, it gives you an idea of just how good people are in our community when I found out that where the fire truck or the various components that they have, various appliances they have, they've been typically stored on farmers' properties and someone that might have a spare shed. So,
right?
It's quite fascinating that people just say, sure thing, you need to park that fire truck somewhere, just put it in my shed, and then it's here in the area when the next fire comes along and we need it. And obviously, that's not really acceptable it's a bit unfair, I suppose, on people when you've got public infrastructure, the fire truck, that's used by the community for various things, obviously when a fire comes along, and a farmer has to put it on their land. So they've been looking for some time for some land to try and find somewhere to locate this fire station. They had the money to build it. The Rural Fire Service had the money allocated to build this fire station, and it was just a matter of time. When they spoke to us at council, we said, well, it makes sense to put it at the aerodrome, a bit like we've got a very good RFS precinct, an emergency services precinct at Dubbo Airport. Then obviously down at Bodangora at the aerodrome down there, there's an opportunity to have things like this there as well. So money was allocated, the build happened, and the opening had to happen. So basically, as you say, the opening occurred there, and at the same time as the opening of the station, and it's an impressive station there, just having some sort of kitchen or breakout facilities there, having a toilet there, having somewhere to store the fire truck and the equipment there is all very important. And it's a nice central location, so when they are fighting fires, they can get to it easily. But there were also 5 new tankers handed over. They like to call them appliances, which I just looked at.
That's a big appliance.
It's a big appliance, that's right.
That fit in my kitchen.
And I kind of just called them tankers, but the 5 different brigades, Bennelong, Elong, Urimbla, Mount Arthur and Walmer, those 5 brigades received new appliances as well. And they vary. There was a 1,000-litre version, a 1,000-litre tanker and a 3,000-litre tanker, I think was the other size there. And they're impressive pieces of equipment. I've seen one of them demonstrated. There wasn't a demonstration on this particular opening, but I saw one when that was being handed over out at Dubbo once before, and they did a few demonstrations. And you think of the tanker as just somewhere to store a lot of water and to get to those fires. But what they've got built into them now is pretty impressive. The first thing they do is they try and protect the occupants, which makes sense. So inside the tanker itself, you've actually got a range of fire blankets that can wrap around all the windows. So if you do find yourself stuck in a fire, you've got the ability to reduce that heat that comes into the cabin. And then they've got a fine hose. It's not a rubber hose, but a metal hose, if you like, that goes along above the windows and the windscreen. That if you find yourself stuck in a fire, you can have a water mist that will come out to try and keep that fire away from the actual cabin itself. So protection of the occupants is pretty important there. You've also got a cannon on the front, and you've got a joystick inside, and you can control that cannon, and that will shoot water 30, 40 metres. You can actually use it, and you can change how it sprays that water, very direct or much more of a spray or a fan. If, for example, you're trying to get out of a fire and you need to have somewhere protecting you, they can actually blast water in front of you as you drive through so that you're able to get that vehicle out of somewhere where you might be stuck where the fire's turned around back on top of you. So
that is fantastic. How good is that? Because I think, was it the terrible, was it the Black Friday fires where there were, unfortunately, I think some of the fireys got caught in one of the fires and died in the cabins. And so I'm so pleased to hear the fact that this is what they're focusing on, because these ideas sound brilliant.
Yeah, they are. And they've certainly been using some of these for some years now. And then even just the way they pick up water. So anywhere they can find a water source, they've got different pumps on there. They can drop a hose in. So, for example, a dam nearby, anywhere they can get water. There could be a swimming pool. You could drive up to somewhere. You can drop it in within a couple of minutes. You fill up that tank and go back out and keep fighting the fire. So it's I suppose, impressive equipment and impressive price tag as well. So these tankers are in the several hundreds of thousands of dollars.
You can imagine.
Yeah.
Is this come from state government funding?
Well, that's an interesting point. It's come from the state government, but councils contribute funds, which many people don't realise. Councils contribute funds to the state government for the state government to then hand out these pieces of equipment. Now, not all the money comes from local government. Money does come from state government as well, but a contribution from local and state government to have all of this. So, good work.
Right?
Good
So what is that? That'd be like me giving you $20 and then you turning around and giving that $20 to some homeless person taking the credit for it.
Well, they do add a little bit to it. So to be fair to the state government, we do give them the $20. They might add $20 to it and then hand over something and take the credit for it. But it's one of those things that many people don't realise how much local government do contribute to the rural fire service. Yeah.
Oh, well done to all parties then, from the sound of things. Alrighty, so moving from aviation to roads. Let's bring on to the road side of things here with the new Dubbo Bridge. That great name for our Dubbo Bridge, the new Dubbo Bridge. Now, it looks like during the week, council's had a chance to have a bit of a site visit to check it out. How's it all going? Are we still on track? Is it going to be completed by around about, I think it was around 2026 or something like that? Is that about right?
Yeah, about the end of 2026. And I must admit, you look at it and you see how much progress has been made, and as an amateur, not an engineer, I go, they'll have this done in a few weeks. Look, they're going so well. But there's obviously a long way to go. So we did get a chance to go up. Most of the time in the visit was spent in the induction and the safety training aspects of it, because as you can imagine, you're going onto a live construction site. You've got to make sure they've done all the induction and gone through the rules and have someone escort you around. But after all that,
hard hats and fluoro vests.
All of the rest of it, and make sure the steel cap shoes, which I had to go and rustle around and find someone to lend me some steel cap boots. I don't normally carry steel cap boots with me. So after all that, we got to go up on the actual deck itself. And people have commented to me that it looks very high, and it is very high because it's got to be over the 1 in 100 year flood, or the 1% chance of a flood level, which is the same as the LH Ford Bridge. You maybe don't notice the LH Ford Bridge being as high because you've got the two ends where it joins in and slopes down away from there.
Yeah, yes.
But, of course, this one, there's a fair length of this that's up pretty high. So a lot of work that's gone into that, and even the work they've done in the river to be able to do some of the work there. They've basically built a little area where they're going out into the river itself. So they've actually had to almost build a little pad out into the river, which then they'll have to take away at the end of it all. So everything that's there involves a lot of time. They've got decks they're putting down on the pylons. All the pylons have basically been done now. And you may well remember that there was some discussion there around the pylons that had to go deeper than they originally thought. Now, these are friction.
I think all of Dubbo heard how deep it was going.
Yeah, that's right.
The echoing, the bang, 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 the constant sound of that, which went on for what appeared like months.
Yeah, and I think people could hear it from everywhere in Dubbo, couldn't they?
Yep, absolutely.
They're an interesting one. They're a friction pylon. So most people might think about driving down a pylon until you get to bedrock and then maybe pouring concrete in the middle of that. These pylons they're an open cylinder, and they basically have friction on the outside and the inside of the pylon with all the dirt that's on either side. Now, think about maybe putting a star picket in the ground, for example. You put that in, obviously that's relying on friction with the ground around that to hold that star picket in, but you're only talking about holding up a bit of wire and a fence. Obviously, what we're talking about with a bridge is you've got a lot of weight with the bridge itself and then the cars on top of that. So it's probably like a star picket, but then multiplied by a lot. So when they were driving these pylons down, it got to the point where they're at the level with the geotech they'd done that they thought they should have been deep enough. But they do that testing, if you like, but when they keep driving it, if it moves a certain distance and there's not enough friction there to support the weight that will go on it. So they had to keep driving, and in the end, many of them did end up on bedrock, even though that wasn't the original design, because there just wasn't enough friction holding it back as they kept driving them down. So some of those pylons, maybe 70 metres, 80 metres down into the ground.
Wow. Jeez, that's impressive.
The first question that all councillors had was, is it going to have the traditional dip in the bridge the same as the LH Ford Bridge? but they assured us that there will be no dip in this bridge because
The
they've
traditional dip.
done enough work in driving the pylon down into, or the pylons down into the ground.
So the actual length of it, how long is it?
Yeah, long. You put me on the spot now. 660 metres comes to mind, but I'm only guessing that. So, yeah, it's a long bridge because, again, you've got to go from the across the river and down across where it joins into River Street. So it's a long bridge. So it's one of those things that the idea of keeping it above the floodplain is you've got to make it that long to keep it all above the floodplain. So it's a long bridge. And, again, high, as we've talked about before, where they're up to at the moment, they've been putting the decks on, so the decks that are spanning from pylon to pylon. So a lot of that work's been done for some of those decks, more decks to go. But, of course, after that, you've got to put the asphalt on top of that. You've got the railings on the sides, and you've got to join into the existing roadway. So that's a pretty big challenge as well. We've also got some work they're doing for us in terms of the sections that will go across and feed that northwest precinct. So a lot of work's been done, but a long way still to go.
Because, as you say, that northwest precinct, you can sort of see it as you're going across there over the river bridge. So they're actually connecting from there to the new bridge. That's all that construction work through there as well? Is that the plan?
Not so much all that construction work. The bridge was being constructed along there anyway, and you can see it. You're quite right. You can see it go along there. But we did some work on what we would need in terms of the intersection there joining in. And it's too early for us to need that intersection, but we had some discussions with Transport for New South Wales, and they said that if you come along afterwards and join in, you'll be able to do that. But because it's already an operating bridge, it'll be part of the Newell Highway. Then when you start to join into that existing infrastructure, you're creating traffic issues and expense to do all of that in the work that you would have to do and how you'd have to do it. So the better option Transport for New South Wales believed was for us to ask for an alteration to the contract. We've got to pay for that alteration. So we're doing that, and Abergeldy in the building of that bridge will actually do that intersection on our behalf as they do that whole process. So it's one of those things. It's earlier than we need to spend the money, but big picture, it'll be less money than if we did it later on.
Oh, mate, it's very, very exciting. Looking forward to sort of seeing the end result at the end of 2026. Now, one of the biggest problems, Matt, obviously being out here in the country, and for that matter, a lot of cities are still sort of complaining about the same thing, is retaining doctors and getting doctors to come out to the regions. Good to see the fact that during the week, one of the proactive initiatives here is having a GP registrar night. Now, that's a fantastic initiative. It looks like the Dubbo Regional Council has implemented here, and it looks as though you had one during the week. So tell us about it. Did you get plenty of registrars there, and how did the night go?
Yeah, it was good, and it's one of those things that it's about being proactive and trying to make sure we attract and retain. That's not our primary job, obviously, as council. We don't really have control over doctors, but we've talked about it before many, many years ago when the University of Sydney School of Rural Health was having trouble getting some numbers in terms of their students to come out, trying to attract some students out to the medical school here in Dubbo. Then we implemented a process where we basically showed off the community to potential students, and that suddenly got to the point where they're way oversubscribed now. So it's really about showing off what we've got.
That's great.
GP registrars are a slightly different kettle of fish in that they've already gone through their training, they've already finished their student part off, and they're training to be a GP. And so they get allocated to a GP as part of that training. And you have people allocated from whatever medical school they went to, across GPs, across a whole range of areas, and we get some out in our region. So Dubbo and maybe Narromine and Gilgandra and Orange and Parks and a whole range of areas around here. And they do some training here in Dubbo. There's some processes that occur where they need to do some training. So we suggested it'd be a good idea for council to host a night where we basically get to show off the community and talk about the community with these registrars, and they also get to talk to some of the local GPs just to find out a bit more about what might be involved there. So they do this every 6 months as a kind of a new intake every 6 months. Sometimes at the beginning of the year, the intake will be for 12 months, but then there'll be another intake halfway through the year. So that was the second intake we did with this one. So the numbers are a bit lower than the one at the beginning of the year because some of the ones at the beginning of the year are still here. They don't need to come along again. And it really is about showing off the city, showing off what we've got to offer. I obviously speak to them and talk to them about what Dubbo, I think, can offer them as GPs and how significant it is. I often make the joke that I'm sure at the other locations they're at, the mayor doesn't come along and talk to them, but Dubbo, you're important enough in Dubbo that definitely you should come along and have the mayor talk to you, which we do. I also do give them...
Probably will turn around and say, oh, yeah, this is a normal thing.
That's right, exactly right. We want it to be a normal thing in Dubbo, but not necessarily everywhere else. But I also try and bribe them. I give them some merchandise, some I Love Dubbo cups I gave them this time, or maybe I give them some caps or different things there.
Can't go wrong with those. That's actually, bribery works very well when it comes to those situations.
Let me just say, it's not the same as the commissioner. I'm not giving out commissioner's gin. There's no alcohol given out. It's just some I Love Dubbo cups. So it's nothing at that level here. But it's really just a chance for the community, myself on behalf of the community, to say you are valued and important in regional locations. And I know all of them aren't going to go to Dubbo, but if they look at Mudgee or Orange or Bathurst or somewhere in the region, then that's important. And you just having this conversation with them, they do start to realise that there is a huge future for them in these regional locations rather than get stuck in the same old in Sydney, get stuck in mortgage paying, get stuck in the commute. Some of them have the light bulb go on and they realise that they don't need to spend an hour a day in the car. They don't need to spend 40 hours a month trying to commute to a job. They could spend 5 minutes to commute to somewhere. So a whole range of things they feel there's an advantage there. And so it is pretty nice for them to have those light bulb moments, and hopefully we retain some of those in regional areas. And even if they don't end up in Dubbo, if they end up in the region, I still see that as a win for everywhere in the region.
Oh, absolutely. Are we winning the battle here, Matt? Are we starting to turn the tide? Are we able to sort of to get the numbers starting to increase with some of these registrars actually deciding to stay on in the regions?
It's getting better. I don't think we've won the battle. I think we're winning at the moment where we're getting more. And without a doubt, the School of Medicine, the School of Rural Health that's based here in Dubbo, the fact they've now gone to their entire 4-year degree here, that's pretty exciting. And at the end of next year, we'll have the first cohort come out of the School of Rural Health that started year 1. You remember before that it was year 3 and 4. They would do their training year 1 and 2 in Sydney and then come out to years 3 and 4 in Dubbo, for example. But now with the whole 4 years here, I think at their stage of life, when they spend 4 years being educated here in Dubbo, the chance of them being retained here is much greater. So it's not an instant solution. You don't click your fingers and solve these problems. You need to have long-term solutions, and I think that is certainly a long-term solution.
Are the governments, obviously I'm assuming governments are aware of the fact this is an ongoing issue here in the rural sector. What type of initiatives have governments put into place to try to retain doctors out here? I
can't tell you specifically about various initiatives, except the fact that obviously governments need to support things like the School of Rural Health. They're not run as an island by the university, so government certainly back those. And I know there are just talk about various essential workers and trying to attract essential workers to regional areas. I can't name you a specific program that a government's got in place. I'm sure there are some, but I suppose we focus on what we can do as a council, and some of that just general PR work, making sure they know that they're important, they're valued, and they will be absolutely welcome with open arms. I think those sort of things are important for a doctor to understand.
Now, a few podcasts back, Matt, we talked about how councils decided to change the sales model of selling a few of the blocks up there at Keswick Estate. And it appears as though, from what I can see here, that some of these new measures might be delivering a few results, because during the week you had a chance to catch up with a few of the developers, potential developers here who are interested in not only just sort of buying a few of the blocks, but actually doing some very interesting projects on them.
Yeah, that's right. And it is nice when you make a decision at council and within a very short time frame you see results from that. So just to remind listeners, the main changes we made in relation to sales at Keswick relate to the number of blocks that a individual business or person can buy. In the past, that was a limit of 2. You couldn't buy any more than 2 blocks, full stop. So even if you bought 2 blocks and sold them, you couldn't. That was it. That was the end of it. We changed that and we resolved to go to a 5 limit. So no builder or entity or related entity can buy more than 5 units at the same time. In other words, they could buy 5, and if, for example, they built a house on one and sold that off, they could buy another one. So they can't hold any more than 5 at any point in time. And we also went ahead with the idea of builder's terms. In other words, you've got 12 months to pay for that block of land. That, I think, is very attractive to potentially a young builder that might be trying to get a bit of a start. They could buy a block of land, they could build a house on it, and then they don't need to pay for that until either 12 months comes around or they sell it. And if they sell it, it has to be paid for basically before that transaction goes through. So that's pretty attractive for any builder. But we had one group who came along and visited us during the week and went up and asked me to come along and just have a talk to them about the land around that area and the potential for Dubbo in general. So they're very keen to buy 5 blocks. They love the idea of builder's terms, and why wouldn't you? If someone said you could pay for it in 12 months rather than today, that sounds attractive from a whole range of reasons. No interest charged on that. But a few different developers and builders have talked to us about that and like that concept. But one particular one, and this is one that I'm happy to talk about on a side issue where this particular builder is building a 3D home with social housing, which we'll talk more about that in a moment if you like. But this same builder is very keen in Dubbo to do some homes in Keswick that are 3D printed on the back of the success we've seen with the 3D printed amenities block. Then they're keen to build 5 and really start a bit of a rolling program and see what else they can build in Dubbo, because they see so much potential in Dubbo and they've got some expertise around 3D printing. So they're keen to see what they can do in Keswick around 3D printing and keep expanding from there. But I'm happy to talk also about that.
So are they looking at doing it? Sorry to interrupt you there, buddy. Are they looking at doing these 5 homes as like project homes sort of style? Is that the thing?
They'll be looking to do these homes potentially as spec homes, I'd imagine. But again, they want to get in, build them. They believe they've got a very quick business model with their 3D printed home. So get in, build them, keep rolling them over. But that's the start for this particular developer in Keswick in terms of doing these on a spec basis, if you like. But they know of lots of other areas around Dubbo where we know how to do a DA for 3D printed home, for example, and they're keen to keep working on the potential in Dubbo.
Isn't that exciting? Did they come to you and speak to you about the fact that, you know, we'd heard about the 3D printed design of the toilet there. We've looked into it. We're very interested here now in the fact that what council can do to support us with this, because we'd like to do that. Is that where all that initiative came from?
Well, it goes back a little bit further than that. I'll give you a bit more information now on the social housing home. There was an announcement made during the week by the Minister for Housing, Rose Jackson, that Dubbo will be the first location in the nation that will have a social housing project done with the 3D printing concept. So there's a group called the Aboriginal Housing Office, so AHO, and so they're obviously responsible for Aboriginal housing. So that's a government department, if you like. And so they've been working with Rose Jackson in terms of that government department, Homes New South Wales. And so they've been working on this concept of, can we deliver social housing in a faster, more affordable, more sustainable way? One group called the ASH Group, which is a private building firm that really specialises in this building of various social and affordable housing, they've been working with the government. And so there was an announcement during the week where Rose Jackson made the announcement to say that home will be built, and 51 Ronald Street is the address, so they're in South Dubbo, and that will be a duplex, or a dual occupancy is the more correct name, that will be built with 3D printed concept. Now, that absolutely is on the back of our 3D printed amenities block. So you'll remember we only need to go back around mid-2022. There was a resolution brought forward by Councillor Matt Wright to reserve some blocks of land in a future development, not this development of Keswick, but in a future development for 3D printed homes. So basically, if you like, a concept where we wanted to signal to the world that we were ready to take on some 3D printed homes and those blocks of land would be reserved. So that's back on the 26th of May 2022. On the back of that, we needed to actually have our staff work out how they would be able to process a DA for a 3D printed facility, whether it be an amenities block, a home, whatever it might be, because we were breaking new ground. So again, and if I go back, sorry, that resolution on the 26th of May 2022, that was brought forward by Councillor Matt Wright, but we discussed that, talked about that, and Council unanimously resolved to set aside 4 residential blocks in a future Keswick Estate release. So that was signalling to the world. And we had lots of phone calls on the back of that. We ended up 7, 8 meetings with various companies from around the world who were keen to do some 3D printing. We said, hold on a sec, we're not at that stage yet. We're just saying we're reserving some blocks of land. But the interest was incredible. In August 2022, we again unanimously resolved to say, well, we've got an amenities block. There was a budget put aside of $300,000 several years ago, back in the old council, the last council. So why don't we do a 3D printing project on that amenities block? So that came to council. We talked about that. Again, we unanimously resolved to do a call for tenders for 3D printing of that amenities block. So that made sense, and council was very supportive of that. I mentioned before about the planning process. In September 2022, a report came back from our staff to say, yes, here's how we would approve a DA if one came forward related to 3D printing. And then on the 8th of December 2022, councillors again unanimously resolved to award the tender for the amenities block. Basically went through that process with a normal tender process. So 3D printing had come to council 4 times over the May to December 2022 timeframe. Each time, councillors unanimously resolved to go ahead with 3D concepts. And of course, now we know that that 3D amenities block was done. Contour 3D won that tender. They did that, and that created interest across the nation. On the back of that, that's where the ASH group said, Dubbo looks like they're open to the idea of taking on some different concept of building. And so they then talked to their contacts in government and wanted to do some projects around social housing. And so they basically talked to the government. Government said, yes, please go ahead, build some social housing there. So that was the announcement during the week that the ASH group would be doing that building in Ronald Street, 51 Ronald Street. So that's pretty exciting.
You know what I find so exciting about that? Yeah, I was going to say that the big thing I find so exciting about that, Matt, is how often does it take, particularly if this is all successful, I can see this as being almost like a changing government, state government policy. So how often does that ever happen where you get state government policy changed by local council groups, by the initiatives of local council groups?
Well, it is pretty exciting. I think you're right. Yeah, and it's not that often that you do see some initiatives from a council change where state government's headed. So the fact that we reserve those blocks of land for 3D printing, we build an amenities block, now we're going to have additional housing built in Dubbo, 3D printed, which again helps the housing stock we've got here in Dubbo for one home. But that's just one. And again, I'm sure this will all be successful and it'll continue on. And now you'll see the Minister for Housing make more announcements, I'm sure, in the future about 3D printing. Everyone seems pretty excited about this in the state government, about the concept of 3D printing. And then on the back of that, the ASH group, the same group that I just mentioned there, are looking at Keswick, not on a social housing project, but just building housing in Keswick using the same 3D printing concept. So it's happening in Dubbo. It's happening in Dubbo first. It's going to help solve our housing crisis in Dubbo and, sure, across the state and probably across the nation, but it's happening in Dubbo first on the back of the initiative that this council has shown around 3D printing and around being a progressive council. So you're right, it is pretty exciting, but also pretty exciting for people that don't have somewhere to live. The chances of you getting somewhere to live now are going to be better because of these initiatives that we've shown, and certainly better for people in Dubbo.
Yeah, and as you say as well, there's always going to be the traditional style of homes. You've got your brick veneer, your weatherboard, all those sort of style of homes can still be built. This is just another alternative option, which has shown the initiative in the starting here in Dubbo itself, which is so exciting. All right, speaking of exciting, how about this? During the week, the 1 millionth That's right. 1 millionth attendee turned up at the DRTCC. Boy, oh boy, 14 years ago, would you even have thought that this was going to be a possibility?
It's interesting. Someone did actually say to me, you were there at the opening on the 23rd of July 2010. How long did you think it would take to have 1 million people? And of course I said, well, 14 years. But the reality is I had no idea. I thought it would have taken decades to get 1 million people.
I would have been with you. I'd have thought, yeah, it'd at least be 20, 25, 30 years maybe till we get 1 million. But 1 million, that's unbelievable. So I'm just doing a quick little bit of mathematics here. Roughly speaking, about 70,000 people go through that place every year.
Yeah, just over that, which is quite incredible, isn't it? So let's go back a little way. When I go to the 2004 election, so I'm going back 20 years, there was a major issue made of the fact that we needed a tiered theatre. A group called Dubbo Arts was instrumental in that process. They were driving that agenda without a doubt. And councillors were asked in the campaign whether they supported the concept of a tiered theatre. Once we got on, there was definitely the support from the community, definitely support from councillors. Trying to fund it was a challenge, and we talked about various government grants. We struggled to get any traction for government grants. In the end, we bit the bullet, and in my 20-year involvement in council, I've only been involved in one special rate variation above CPI, and that was for the theatre. So we did basically 5% over 2 years was the increase. So not a huge amount, but that was enough to pay for it. Now, there were some people in the community, and this was back around 2006, these discussions were occurring, some people in the community who were dead against that, which it was an increase in rate. So I understand that fully. But we as councillors said we think it's worthwhile in the community and we don't think it's too much to pay for a tiered theatre. So we went ahead, it happened, the rate variation went through. 23rd of July 2010, as I mentioned, was the official opening of that. And again, some people said they'd never go to it. It's a waste of money. Some of those people that said that at the time, I've actually seen in the theatre at various events, so that's quite satisfying in some ways.
That's right.
But here we are now in 2024, only 14 years later, we've had 1 million patrons go through the DRTCC. But one of the things that's quite fascinating about that, which I love, is the fact that now it's a tourist attraction in its own right.
Is that right?
35.4% of people that attended the DRTCC last year came from outside the Dubbo Regional Council local government area. So people are travelling to Dubbo. Yeah, that's right. People are travelling to Dubbo, going to the theatre, maybe going to a restaurant, maybe staying overnight, maybe doing some shopping while they're here. But without a doubt, people are being attracted to Dubbo because of it. Now, sometimes they might not travel just because of the theatre. They might be coming to Dubbo for something else. It might not be their sole purpose. They might come to the zoo and then visit the theatre while they're here, but it might keep them in Dubbo an extra day, for example. So it is pretty exciting to see something that I know from my personal perspective, being very selfish here for a moment, I know from the very beginning of the journey I was there and still here 20 years later, and seeing that theatre and seeing how well it's utilised, that's pretty exciting.
Oh, it's absolutely. You know, I'm going to go back even further here very quickly for you. When my mother was on council, this is going back in the 1980s, the idea of putting in a theatre came up as part of the discussion, and she was very proactive in trying to get it through council. It got rejected. This is going back in the 80s. So, 20 years before you even came along with the suggestion, your council group came along with the idea of pushing this forward. This had been part of the discussion for 20 years, and for 20 years people have been saying, no, it's a stupid idea, we can't afford it, it's not going to work. Have a look at it now. So, congratulations to everybody involved who had the initiative and the foresight 14 years ago to finally get this up and running, because here we are today with 1 million people stepping through the doors. Now, during the week, you also had the absolute pleasure. You're down in Sydney right now, but it looks as though you flew down there earlier in the week to catch up with Regional Cities New South Wales, which was a group that you're in, Rich is a group that you're involved with. First and foremost, who is Regional Cities New South Wales and what do they do?
So it's a group of 15 regional cities. So we're talking about way up north, Tweed Heads, Lismore, for example, down south, Albury, Wagga, out around our area, Dubbo, Orange, Bathurst. So you've got 15 cities that we believe have got a lot in common and can share a lot of things that maybe we can work on together have you had this experience? What did you do about it? How can we work together for different things? So it's a group that essentially grew up, in my mind, out of Evo Cities. Evo Cities started back in 2010 as a marketing project to market 7 cities in regional New South Wales.
Albury and Wagga and a few others were involved, weren't they?
Yeah, you've got Tamworth and Armidale, Bathurst, Orange, Dubbo, and Albury and Wagga. They were the original 7. But then it was realised that we've probably got more clout if we've got more of us together. And certainly those other cities have got many things in common. They're different. All those cities are different. But they've certainly got things that are in common. And the first thing is you sit around with 15 cities that have got things in common and talk about issues, talk about sharing some of the pain points and sharing some of the solutions. And often that's the sort of thing that you get out of these meetings. You say, oh, actually, we've solved that problem. We'll send you through the paperwork or the contract or how we did that. And I think with that collaboration, you get better outcomes for all of those cities. And I have this very big picture view that a win for regional New South Wales is a win for everyone in regional New South Wales. So I don't get that concerned when I see something happen that's good in Orange or Bathurst or Tamworth, because it's a win for regional New South Wales. And it's a bit of swings and roundabouts. Sometimes they'll get some grants or they'll get something happen there and we'll get some later on down the track. So I don't mind that in general. I think obviously I'm always going to be biased towards Dubbo, but I think wins for regional areas are wins for all of us. The other part that's quite good is that we are finding this is definitely happening now. When we want to meet with government, it's easier to get a meeting with various ministers, with government, when you've got a representation of 15 rather than 1. And I've often said it to ministers, it's better for you to have one meeting with 15 of us rather than 15 individual meetings, because their time is valuable, is precious, and it's hard to get into some of those ministers sometimes. But having 15 of us there in one room, they actually enjoy that and appreciate the fact they can speak to essentially 1 million residents is what we're representing there, which is obviously better than each of us individually representing those different ones there. So it's a good group, a very collaborative group, work well on things together, and we meet in Parliament once a quarter to be able to have access to some of those various ministers and have access to those various people and also share some pain points and share some things. So typically they're a 2-day meeting. We'll come in on one day. We'll typically have some delegations where we'll meet with some of those various ministers, bring forward certain points that we want to work on. And then the second day is what we would call a board meeting where we discuss various policy settings, various things that we've got in common, various pain points, and we might still invite different people into those various meetings that we have on the second day.
Ah, very good. Sounds like a very important group to be part of. Now, speaking of important meetings and catching up with different sort of groups down there, it looks as though one of the first groups that Regional Cities New South Wales met with was Homes New South Wales. Now, I'm not necessarily familiar with this group. Who's Homes New South Wales?
You might say it's a bit of a renaming or potentially a bit of a combination of some other departments, but it basically brings together the housing services and the homelessness services of the New South Wales Department of Communities and Justice, so DCJ, with the New South Wales Land and Housing Corporation, what used to be known as LAC, LAHC, and also the New South Wales Aboriginal Housing Office. So basically all of the housing, the key worker housing, if you like, is all under that one department. So Homes New South Wales is essentially charged with the responsibility from the New South Wales government to turbocharge the construction, the maintenance, repair of social and affordable homes across the state. So that's their job. So
that'd be one of the busiest groups down there for sure, I'd imagine right now.
No small task for them for what they've got to do. So meeting with them,
massive.
Absolutely vital for what we think in terms of regional cities are needed across the state. And all of our regional cities have got that similar problem. Not enough housing. Lots of people want to move to our various locations.
Did you get a chance to have a discussion about, well, obviously Rose Jackson made an announcement during the week, so I'm assuming she must be heavily involved with this group. Did you get a chance to talk about the 3D printed social housing?
Definitely. And so Rose Jackson's the minister responsible in this scenario. We often do meet with Rose. In this particular scenario, we met with one of Rose's staff and also with one of the staff from the department themselves. And so again, sometimes we meet with ministers, sometimes we meet with the staff. It's good to get a combination of both. The staff are obviously on the ground doing, and they've got to give the right advice to the minister. So it's good for us to be able to have those conversations with the staff as well. One of the questions that we asked as a collective, so there's 15 cities sitting around the table. You've got Homes New South Wales there. Across the board, our cities have got not enough social housing, not enough affordable housing. So one of the questions that was asked, probably a key question, was, okay, how can we help? We don't have the budget of the state government. We don't think it's appropriate for us to take land that council might own and give it to Homes New South Wales for you to build housing on, because again, we've got budgets we've got to try and look after. But how can we help as councils progress the solution? And there were a couple of points that were made. One of the points was a point that was made by Paul Scully with the league table. We've talked about how well Dubbo is going on that league table, but basically make sure you can get your DAs processed in a timely fashion to make sure that you can keep pumping through houses. Don't cut corners, don't ignore things that are important, but make sure you keep those pumping through. But they also said, which was music to my ears, look at the example of what Dubbo's done and what Lake Macquarie's done. So two examples they had there. They said Dubbo has been leading the way in 3D housing, and they kind of mentioned the fact that there's some social housing about to be built in Dubbo using 3D printing. But they said they made sure that the planning department at Dubbo was able to process a DA that was lodged for a 3D printed home. So make sure your councils have got the staff across the information, if you like, for a 3D printed home. And the example they gave in Lake Macquarie was more around a prefab type home. So if someone wants to put up a prefabricated or a tilt panel type home, make sure you've got the ability for your planning department to be able to process that as well. And so they're doing that in Lake Macquarie. And this is a thing, I think you mentioned it before, that the state government is looking at a range of solutions in terms of how they accelerate all of these homes, these housing solutions that we need. That will involve some 3D homes. That will involve some prefab.
Sorry, buddy. It also sounds to me as well as though the fact that they are looking at wanting to, if they're out there saying to these other council groups, sort of, you got to get on board with this. You need to get your engineers, get everybody who's involved in regards to the understanding, get the DA approvals through of these 3D printed homes. You need to get on board because we're wanting to push them around the state.
That's absolutely spot on. And the same with prefab. They certainly are convinced they want to do more work with prefab or tilt panel type homes. So different construction methods, because it's just not going to be a case of doing a brick veneer home and having enough bricklayers and enough tradies to do that. The time frame that everyone, state government, federal government, local governments, realise we need to deliver for these homes are just not going to be delivered by traditional methods, and there just aren't enough tradespeople out there to deliver with traditional methods. So it's going to involve a range of different solutions. And the message from Homes New South Wales, loud and clear, was make sure you as council groups are ready for these different solutions that are out there, not tomorrow, not next week, next month, next year, today.
It's so impressive in the fact that we are right out in front in regards to how this is all going to happen. Now, while you're down there, it sounds like, Matt, and looking through some of this paperwork here, you had a chance to catch up with a few of the ministers as well as RC New South Wales. So who are some of the ministers you caught up with while you're there, and tell us about some of the discussions?
Yeah, certainly, it's a lot of good discussions and good access to ministers. And I think this government has been really good giving us access to various ministers. So we met with Ron Honig, who's the Minister for Local Government. We met with the Treasurer, Daniel Mookie. We met with Joe Halen, who's the Minister for Transport. A couple of shadows as well. So we met Dave Lizelle, who's the Shadow Minister for Regional Transport and Roads. Caught up with Dougal Saunders, who's obviously the leader of the National Party, but also Shadow Minister for Regional New South Wales. So always good. We've caught up with Ron a number of times, Minister for Local Government. A good discussion with Ron about a range of things. He's very keen on making some changes to the Code of Conduct, for example. There are some issues with the Code of Conduct. Even the Code of Meeting Practice, Ron's keen to change and want to get a bit of feedback from us on that. And also a bit of a solution he's trying to put together for Central Darling. The Central Darling area is a huge area. I suspect the largest council area in the state. And I don't know this one for a fact, but potentially the smallest population. So you've got a problem with financial sustainability there. And he's talking about a solution where it might be not an elected council going forward there, but a council that might have 3 elected and 3 appointed by the state government, because the state government's going to have so much money they'll need to pour into it. They probably won't have a greater say where that money goes.
Okay.
The treasurer is actually really good. I met with the treasurer sometimes in Dubbo before he became the treasurer, and certainly since he's become the treasurer, we've met with Daniel many times. And Daniel loves the idea that this group, Regional Cities New South Wales, this group is something that he can use as a sounding board for different items, different ideas. So we're gaining the confidence of government in being that sounding board for them. So that's fantastic. And Jo Halen, first time we've met with her as Regional Cities, Minister for Transport, covers a whole range of things. Jenny Aitchison, we've met with a number of times, so we did talk about that in terms of the roads in particular. But Minister for Transport covers a range of things. And again, it was timely. Airports, REX, a whole range of discussions around the ongoing viability of transport and airlines in particular, we discussed with Jo. So good discussions there. Wendy Tuckerman also dropped in just for a brief discussion. She's the former Minister for Local Government. She just wanted a few thoughts from Regional Cities New South Wales about things that are happening in the local government space. So I think not only are we getting good access to ministers and various politicians, but I think those various ministers in particular are seeing regional cities as a good sounding board for them to make sure that some of their policies and some of their ideas are going to land correctly.
So in a general sense, is the feeling within RC New South Wales that are they getting what they want from state government?
We're certainly getting good access, and I'm the chair of Regional Cities New South Wales, so I certainly do have good access to those various ministers. So I feel like we are getting good access, we're getting good discussions. Do we get everything we want? Well, not quite. We did ask Jenny Aitchison for $3.9 billion to fix 93 pinch points across the state. She didn't write the cheque out on the spot. So I get that. But I think just the idea of having those discussions and progressing and seeing where we can make a difference, I think we're getting good access. And that's all you can really ask for to start with.
Okay, cool. I noticed also you caught up here with the Minister for Police, that Yasmin, was that Yasmin Catley? Is that right? So what was the nature of the discussion there with Yasmin Catley?
Well, we didn't quite catch up with Yasmin Catley. We were scheduled to catch up with the Police Minister. And you may remember during the week, there was a bit of a discussion around the Commissioner, Karen Webb, and some bottles of gin that she had made up. And these were colloquially known as Commissioner's Gin, or actually it might have even been labelled Commissioner's Gin. But there was a fair bit of discussion around that. So the time we had booked in for our discussion with Yasmin was about the same time this was all breaking, and the fact that Yasmin had said that she'd received a bottle of gin from the Commissioner. So there was a fair bit of action around Parliament House related to this, both in Parliament itself, but also in the media circle. So when we were booked to meet with Yasmin, unfortunately, Yasmin was a little bit tied up with all of this discussion going on. So that was a bit disappointing. But again, things happen. We understand that. But we always were going to catch up with the Deputy Commissioner along with Yasmin. Paul Pizanos was the Deputy Commissioner there. So he came along and spoke to us in place of Yasmin. But again, we were always going to catch up with Paul. So a great discussion with Paul around a range of things. And one thing, I'm happy to take some questions in there in particular, but one thing around recruitment, I think, which has made a big change.
Right. Yep. And did you also find the fact there too that in talking to Paul, and from the point of view of Regional Cities New South Wales, is there a common thread? Are there concerns out there in regards to what people perceive as youth crime and these sort of issues, and what sort of initiatives are being put into place to try to resolve this?
So certainly, without a doubt, Paul, he was very good actually, knew his data, knew his information, very impressive in terms of just his overall understanding of crime in general, but also policing. And he's certainly aware of some of the issues there, although I think around the table, most of the Regional Cities New South Wales group feel quite comfortable with the policing. Sure, we'd always like more policing, but comfortable with the level of policing and the work that the police do. I think the frustration around the table seemed to be more once the police catch someone, then what happens with those offenders, and they seem to be back out on the streets. So that's not something that police can control, but it's more a judicial process there. But one of the things that certainly I think will be a big change that Paul sees, and we've already spoken to our local commander, Tim Chin, about this, is they've made two changes in the recruitment process. So where they did feel like they just weren't getting enough police numbers coming through, they made two changes. The first is they actually pay their trainees while they're training them now. In the past, if you want to be a police officer, there are a number of steps to go through, including going to Goulburn and going through the academy, but you didn't get paid to do any of that. And one of the things that they were finding was that if you wanted to go into the army, for example, you go down to Kapuka, then you get paid while you're doing that training. Now, for a young person, that might be something that's nice. You might get some extra money. Mum and dad don't have to pay for you while you're doing that training, so that's nice. So some people are choosing the armed forces over the police because sometimes it's a similar mindset for those too. But what they're also finding with the police is there were opportunities there for someone that may be a little bit older, so not straight out of school, for example, but maybe a bit older, maybe they've established a bit of a life, and they had financial commitments, so they simply couldn't afford to go and be a police officer, even if they really wanted to. So that certainly made a change to recruitment numbers. But the other part, which I think is fantastic, is that you can be, and I think there's a tagline they've got for it, be a cop in your town. So the idea here is that in the past, you'd go to Goulburn, you'd go through the academy, you'd come out and you'd get stationed to, well, wherever. And again, for an 18-year-old out of school, that might be quite exciting. You go to somewhere new, you learn about somewhere new and you move around the state a little bit. But for someone that's a bit older, and again, there's some focus on making sure they attract people a little bit older, someone with a bit more life experience, a bit older, they might already have a partner, they might already have kids, they might already have a life established. They're playing in some local netball or touch footy teams, whatever it might be. And then they go and join the police force and they get stationed somewhere else and suddenly, oh, wow, I don't really want to be a police officer now because I've got to uproot my whole life. So they don't do that. But be a cop in your town, the whole initiative is you can nominate a local area that you come from and you can get stationed back in that once you get through your training. So, and I don't think it's as specific, and you'd have to read the exact rules, but it may not be I come from Dubbo, I go back to Dubbo, but it might be I come from Dubbo and I can go back to Wellington, Dubbo or Narromine. So somewhere that's basically the same area that you could keep living in that same area. So that apparently has made a big difference to the recruitment as well. So I think good initiatives there by the state government, and I think initiatives that already Paul talked about delivering results.
Oh, fantastic. Now, finally, in regards to sort of the meeting side of things, it would be remiss not to sort of, I'd suggest, as regional cities, New South Wales, to get down there and not get a chance to catch up with the Premier, Chris Minns. Did you get a chance to catch up with Chris?
Absolutely right. And this was the first meeting we've officially had with the Premier as regional cities, New South Wales. Now, Chris did come along when he was the opposition leader and meet with us and brought along some of his shadow ministers and had a great discussion. And so he understood about regional cities existing and certainly understood that the group was there and a good sounding board, but it was a good opportunity. Now he's been in the job for a year and about 4 months or so, and so it's a good opportunity to invite Chris along to have a discussion with us and just really get his thoughts on how things are travelling and pick a couple of key topics to talk to Chris about. Now, the challenge here was you've got the Premier in the room. What are the key topics? What are the crucial things? You've only got him for probably 45 minutes. What are the key topics you can bring up with the Premier, the ones that are going to hit home and the most crucial ones? Keep in mind, and I did say this to Chris, that I'm impressed with the access we've had to the ministers from his government. So there's probably no point going over the same old ground over and over. So we picked 3 areas that we wanted to focus on with Chris. The first one was just the relationship between the government and regional cities, New South Wales, making sure that we both have a clear understanding of that relationship and make sure it's a good relationship that, again, they can use us as a sounding board and we can bring the weight of 15 councils, 15 major regional cities to the government to really tell the government things that we need some help with different areas. And Chris already seemed to be pretty much across regional cities, New South Wales, understood, knew me, knew that I was the chair of the group, understood the importance of RCNSW. So tick, that seemed good, that ongoing relationship, building that relationship, continuing on down that path. The second thing, housing, was one that we thought that we could help the most with. And sure, we'd had the discussion with Homes New South Wales earlier in the day, but we just thought it was important to talk to Chris about housing and just let him know how keen we are to help solve the problem with housing in any financially sustainable way that we can do that. Certainly the prefab came up, 3D printing came up, a whole range of different areas for discussion came up. So I think the message certainly came home there that housing we understand to be important, just the same as Chris understands to be important. And we're losing people from the state. That's a crucial part from Chris's perspective. We are losing people from the state, and housing is one of those reasons, one of those main reasons we're losing people. So that was important as well.
Is that right? They're heading off to Queensland or somewhere?
They are going to other areas where they can actually find housing, and find housing sometimes more affordable housing than it is in New South Wales, because house prices in Sydney are horrific. So that's a major concern for Chris, definitely, that we are losing our residents. We'd rather not lose our residents, and obviously housing can play a part in that. So that was important. The third part that we thought we'd talk to him about was around the importance of regional airports. And again, Rex, it was timely around Rex, but it wasn't about Rex. We didn't want to make it a conversation about Rex. We wanted to make it a conversation around linkage. If we want to be able to attract people to regional areas, we want to be able to attract people to Dubbo, we want to make sure we've got good linkages, and we think we've got a better chance of attracting people to regional areas if we've got good transport links in place. So the importance of good transport links and the importance of having those transport links not necessarily subsidised by our community, but maybe subsidised by the government, that was certainly emphasised, because we think we've got a solution. We think we can help solve the problem for for housing and the population in the state, but transport will be an important part of putting those together.
Do you feel as though he's getting that, and his government is getting that? I suppose from a cynical point of view, sitting out here in the country, I go down to the city and there is so much work getting done down there in regards to transport options. It's just absolutely ridiculous. The new metro's running in. There's new massive motorways being built around the place. There's so much money being pumped into the city focus down there. Is he getting the fact that we need these options out here? Like a simple little thing. To me, it seems pretty simple. The fact the regional airports is such a vital link. It should be a high priority in regards to that Labor government, or our current Labor government, in regards to it. Do you think that they're getting it?
Well, to be fair to Chris, one of the things he certainly has said is he knows St George. He's from Cogra. He understands that area, the St George area, if you like, and understands the city. But he says, I don't understand regional areas fully, which is why he wants to talk to groups like regional cities, why he likes to get out into regional areas and understand those more. So I think, to be fair to Chris, he is getting how important regional areas can be for his state government. And I'm not sure that he has all the answers and understands it completely yet, but that's not a criticism of Chris. That's just saying that he probably, from his perspective, grew up in the city and understands the city better than the country, but he's certainly not ignoring the country, not ignoring regional areas, certainly saying he needs to understand more and how regional areas can help solve problems for the state government. And one of those areas I think definitely that we can solve the problem is population booming. You've got all this population increase in Sydney. Well, we can get those areas out to regional areas. We've got the capacity to handle those people in regional areas. So I think he's getting that, understanding that. But the most important thing, Mark, is he's having conversations with groups like regional cities. That's the way you're going to understand it better, is to have those conversations.
And I think that's probably again to anyone who might be a bit cynical about the reason why regional cities New South Wales exists, is because they have this opportunity to have chats to the government groups and to have chats like Chris Minns, and to as you say, to make sure they do get it, to make sure that they do understand from a regional perspective the issues that we face out here. So look, mate, well done. I'm pleased to see you had that chance to have that opportunity to have that chat with him, and to talk about a couple of those areas there, housing and the regional airports, and the importance of maintaining these flights to these regional centres is such an important link. Well, mate, it's got towards the end of our podcast. It's been a different one this week, sitting here in our different sort of a format. I'm looking forward to actually getting back in the studio with you next week, and so I can sort of see your face one-to-one on those scenarios. But it's been a bit of a different one. It's something I've learnt here today on how to use these different apps over phones and talking to each other from a distance. So it's been a new little adventure for us here today. But, of course, to finish off, we always finish with the Limerick of the Week. So what have you got for us this week?
Lots of things that I considered for the Limerick of the Week this week, but I'm pretty excited about the 1 million people that have gone through the DRTCC.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one.
So this week, the Limerick's all about that, so we'll see how we go. In Dubbo, we've hit quite the score. 1 million have crossed through the door. Since the theatre's debut, they've packed every pew. Now the patrons will cheer for much more.
Well done. You know, listening to it then when you're sort of going through that limerick, I've worked out, of course, the fact that in sort of writing the limerick's one thing, but delivering a limerick's another. There has to be a real pacing to it, isn't there? You know, like you have to sort of make sure you're hitting the right pacing of it. So I really enjoyed it. Well done. Well done. Well, mate, listen, congratulations again on your city to surf. Get back safely to Dubbo town, and I look forward to seeing you again next week back in the studio. But to everyone else out there, have a wonderful week. You guys go out there and take care.
Straight from the mayor's mouth with Matthew Dickerson from Dubbo Regional Council.